As Yuli and Susie mentioned, we have this international transformative education and research network, and at last count, these are the universities around the world that are part of this network. It's an informal network, and I guess we account these universities by the fact that these people attended our conference in Nepal last year. And I'm sorry if I missed anybody out here. Just let me know by email and I'll add you to this. So as you can see, it's a very exciting worldwide network encompassing many countries. And I'd also like to just mention the Deputy Director of the network, who's with us today, Dr. Balchandra Lutel, Professor of Education at Kathmandu University in Nepal. And very special, Bal has done a TEDx talk just recently, and I think that that's generally available to the public. So we have a very powerful intellectual giant up there at Kathmandu University in Nepal, with a fantastic team behind him, developing postgraduate programs in transformative education and taking them out into the local community to work with schools and so on. Here we are with Transformative Education Research Group Indonesia, the executive members. And I won't go through them because Yuli has just done so, but it's great to be working with such an enthusiastic, intelligent and committed team in Indonesia. And it's to them that we can thank for today's presentation. We launched the TERG Indonesia only a little while ago in Surabaya, thanks to hosting Lenny at UNISA in Surabaya. This, I think, was November of 2019. So we were fortunate to be able to do international travel just that little while ago. And right now, of course, we're all locked in. And fingers crossed, we might be able to get together face-to-face again sometime very soon. Because there's nothing like face-to-face, is there, really? You know, being in the same room as people. Yeah. This online is okay, but it's nowhere near as nice as being together. So let's hope that we can do that again sometime very, very soon. Okay, here's the content of what I want to talk to you about today. Now, let me just say, first of all, that because there are so many people, which is a wonderful thing, that have come along today and probably know very little about transformative learning, I've decided to go right back to basics. So I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible. I'll start off with a statement about my positionality. I've been involved in the university world for 35 years, fortunate to work mostly in a graduate centre at Curtin University, where a number of you have come and studied and done your master's and PhD degrees. I have a very strong, passionate commitment to social justice, and in recent years that has expressed itself as a great concern about sustainable development. And that's really underpinning what I want to talk to you about today. So I'm going to talk about, very briefly, some of the global challenges that we are all experiencing. Very briefly, something about why we need sustainable development to address those challenges. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the two worlds problem. The problem that we need to overcome in order to move forward with sustainable development, and how transformative learning is going to help us to do that. And then at the end, we're going to have a little bit on transformative teaching from me, but here's where I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in TERG Indonesia to talk to you about their practical applications in their own teaching practices, so that you can understand what it looks like in classrooms. Okay, global challenges, and I guess there's no need to dwell on this. We're all very much aware of these are the big challenges that we need to overcome in the world around us. The terrible plastic pollution of the waterways, the rivers, the oceans, climate change, which is impacting every one of us, with new weather systems, in very extreme weather systems. In Australia, we've had massive bushfires that have burned so many homes and killed so many people. Very, very unusual weather systems. Huge hurricanes in the northern hemisphere, the warming of the oceans, the acidification of the oceans. Another problem is to do with the loss of natural resources. And we only have to look at the Amazon in Brazil, for example, to see how the forests are being cut down rapidly, which is something that's also happening in many other countries, including Australia. And we're conservationists are trying to fight back and preserve our forests, because once you lose your forests and your natural ecosystems, you begin to lose biodiversity. And we know that a worldwide problem at the moment is the 6th mass extinction, the 6th one that's happened in the history of the planet. So we are losing an enormous number of ecosystems and species in those systems day by day and week by week. Another challenge that we're facing is artificial intelligence. This is, in other words, the development of robots. And as robots become more human-like, it's raising all sorts of ethical questions about their rights as robots, or are they humans? What happens when their intelligence begins to surpass normal human intelligence? Who's going to control the robots? So we have some really interesting issues there. Related to that, cyber surveillance. Now, in Australia, we've just been encouraged by the government to download special apps on our telephones that will tell us when we walk past somebody else in the street who has that app on their telephone, there'll be an exchange of information. And the use of that will be, if somebody is diagnosed with COVID-19, then their data can be used to track people who've been close to them. Now, I think China has been leading the way in facial recognition and online surveillance. And at a recent conference I went to, somebody was talking about having cameras in classrooms and tracking children from home to school. Now, these ideas sound fantastic if you're an IT geek, but if you think about privacy and our private security concerns, then we have some really important issues to decide about. Cultural extinction. Here we have the loss of cultures worldwide, largely because of industrialization and movement to cities, and the globalization of a limited number of languages such as English, which are then being taught in schools all over the world, and local languages are falling away and also going extinct, as are the animals and plants. So loss of languages, loss of cultures. And finally, just in passing, I don't want to dwell on this, we have the problem of terrorism, which springs from intercultural suspicion and hatred. And so these are a number of challenges, and I'm sure you can think of more, that we are needing to face and get on top of as we go forward into the 21st century. And I firmly believe that education is the key. Not necessarily politics, that's important, but education. Education of the individual, education of the community, education of the nation. If I turn for inspiration to the United Nations, which recently published the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And sustainable development for educators is immensely important because it's giving us a global perspective on the purpose of education. And there are these 5 points that I've extracted from that interesting report. The United Nations is advocating that we need to be really concerned with improving the well-being of humanity and the planet. So people and the planet, starting from the individual, going to the family, going to the local community, going to the nation, and then the planet in terms of the ecosystems as well. Social tolerance. If we're going to get on top of violence and terrorism, I can hear a little bird switching in the background there. I'm not sure if this is. Social tolerance, intercultural understanding and acceptance. Environmental stewardship. We need to we need to regard the environment as not something that we exploit, but something that we help mutually to develop and to enrich ourselves, and at the same time to enrich the environment around us, the natural world in particular. Now, something that I think is really, really important coming out of this report is that we can't just leave all this to science alone. Science is going to make great progress for us, but at the same time, science has actually contributed to a number of those global challenges that I mentioned a moment ago. So what the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is promoting is the inclusion of ethics in our education systems. And with the background in science and mathematics education myself, I really warm to the notion that we have to take an interdisciplinary perspective. In other words, instead of just teaching silos like in the science or chemistry or biology or maths classrooms, we reach out to our colleagues in the other disciplines and we start to collaborate around interdisciplinary curricula. And in particular, the science, the technology, the engineering, the mathematics people would benefit enormously by collaborating on curriculum and pedagogies, teaching and learning approaches with their colleagues in the humanities and the arts. And that's an argument that I'll return to in a little while. So for inspiration, I think the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development helps me to commit myself to moving forward as an educator. Let me touch on what I have just recently called the two worlds problem. We have these two worlds. We have the external world, that is the world around us, if you like, the material world, the world outside of our minds and our bodies, the world that we bump into every day, a world of objects and events that are happening. And many would say the world of natural laws, extending beyond the Earth to the solar system, to the cosmos at large, and maybe also into the microscopic world, down to nanotechnologies and down to quantum theory. So it's the world that many people believe is external to us. And there is an argument that it isn't, but I don't want to get into that right now. I just want to, for the sake of argument, keep these two worlds somewhat separate. So the external world, and then we have the inner world. That's the world that's inside each one of us. It's our thinking, it's our sensing with our five senses, it's our feelings and emotions, it's our values and valuing, it's our ability to imagine, and it's our spirituality about the higher things in life, the source of our values in many cases. So we have these two worlds, and for a long time in the West, these two worlds have been seen to be distinctly separate from one another. I know in other cultures and other wisdom traditions, the relationship is seen to be a lot more closer or linked together. But largely, the Western worldview is that there's a separation between these two. Now, traditionally, in my experience, when I went through school and university, and when I've supervised many students who teach science and mathematics and technology, I get the very strong impression, understanding that the relationship between the external world and the inner world in the classroom is pretty much what I'm trying to portray here, that our inner worlds suddenly get reduced just to our thinking. In other words, our conceptualization. And science education research has spent many, many decades focusing on how do we get students to develop the correct concepts. There is a degree of using our five senses, particularly with younger children in elementary and primary schools, to actually touch and smell and feel and so on. So that's certainly a part of learning about the external world. And the notion of valuing here, I think, is greatly reduced. What we tend to value, it's often said that science, STEM education is value neutral. That's the traditional view, that we do not intrude our other attributes of our inner world whilst we're learning. But traditionally, this is pretty much the model. And what it produces is something called objective knowledge. Objective knowledge about the world beyond us. Not so much about the inner world, but the way in which our inner world is used in education to understand the external world. Now, objective knowledge is one thing. It's very important, of course, and we need to do that. But for sustainable development, we need to do much more than that. And that takes me to my next little slide here. For transformative education, we need to bring all of our inner world into play when we're trying to make sense of and understand and connect with the external world. And I'm going to extend that argument in just a moment. So if we do this, what I'm saying here is that we go beyond objective knowledge. We don't reject it, but we do much more than produce objective knowledge. We produce what we could call holistic knowledge. Knowledge of both the external world and an enhanced understanding of our inner worlds, and importantly, of the relationship between the external world and our inner worlds, that intersection which I was unable to clearly define there. Working at that intersection, I think, is really important, and that's where transformative learning is focusing. So just again, transformative learning, which I'll talk more about in just a moment, aims to enrich our understanding of the external world, whilst at the same time enriching our understanding of our inner worlds and of the relationship between these two worlds. Transformative learning enables us, I believe, to make great progress in achieving that particular goal. And here's just a few of the giants of the 20th century whose work, whose ideas, whose theories have contributed to today's notion of transformative learning. Now, the first thing I'll admit is that these are all Western educators and researchers, but this is just a subset of the possibilities, because when I talk to my colleagues in Nepal, Balchandra and so on, who are investigating and developing a strong connection between Eastern wisdom traditions and transformative learning, there are many, many more gurus, if you like, who should really be on this page, and they will be in the future. So transformative learning, the way in which we understand it at the moment is that there are 5 elements to it, or 5 principles to it. And I just want to quickly touch on each one in turn. And just before I move off that slide, this is a really interesting interdisciplinary collection of people. So Carol Gilligan at the top there, a feminist scholar, Parker Palmer, a Christian scholar, John Dewey, a philosopher of education from the early part of the 20th century, whose work is still very much influential and celebrated today. Paulo Freire, a liberation educator, liberation theologist from South America, who recently passed, whose work continues to inform and shape our ideas of social justice, particularly in lesser developing, economically developing countries that have been colonized and are trying to free themselves from the colonial paradigm. We have Abraham Maslow, a psychologist, who's helped us to understand that there are different levels of development, from selfishness right up through to altruism. And we have Jack Mesereau, who in the late part of the 20th century is kind of called the father of transformative education, transformative learning. And he has spawned a huge collection of research and disciples who unpack his work. So that's just very briefly some of the giants whose work we are drawing on in transformative learning. So as of the 5, this is the first one, relational knowing, or opening to the other. And what I believe is that it's really important for us as educators to help our students to learn to connect empathically, lovingly, and spiritually with the natural world and with culturally different others. We need to be able to reach out to other people. We need to be able to embrace difference. If we don't do that, then we have suspicion, which leads to tribalism, which leads to animosity, which leads to hatred, which leads to nationalism, and eventually we have terrorist uprooting of main society. So just again, empathically, being prepared to decenter from yourself, to understand the other, the culturally different other, to do so with a sense of love, that we're all here together on this planet. And the greatest bond between people is evident in the parent-child bond. So, you know, I would urge educators to take that into their relationships with their students. And many of us would draw our values about our relationship with others and the world around us through our religions or spirituality. And that's a fascinating topic as we, across the planet, so many different views and ideas. So a little bit of you are muted by the host, it says. Okay, let me pause. You're muted. Press Alt-A to unmute your microphone. Alt-A. You're unmuted. Okay, I'm back online again. There was a little bit of a hiccup there, technical hiccup. So relational knowing, so important to education from a sustainable development point of view. If we don't love nature, if we don't love nature, what's the alternative? And how do we get to love nature? We really need to take our students out to hug a tree, to sit by a stream, to paddle in the ocean, to understand firsthand through our senses, through their senses, the beauty of nature. The second element to transformative learning is self-knowing. And this is where learning about why we behave the way we do without thinking about it, basically, learning the origin of our own habits of mind. This morning I got up and turned on the electricity without thinking. And guess what? There was no electricity because there's a power outage. So a little bit later, I went into another room and turned on the electricity again, but it didn't happen because my habit of mind is when I walk into a room, I turn on the electricity. I don't think about it, I just do it. These are the way in which we get through our lives efficiently. We have automatic programs built into us, but we're not aware of them. And that leads us to act. Again, a little bit of okay, I guess these little technical hiccups. So what self-knowing is to reflect, to become aware of our values and beliefs that drive us to do things automatically, because maybe we need to change them. You know, maybe we don't need to throw a plastic bag on the ground, or even say, yes, I will have a plastic bag when I go shopping, which is an automatic reaction when it's handed to you. Maybe there's opportunities to say, oh, no, I don't really like to take my goods home from the shop. We as educators help our students become aware of the automatic way in which they lead their lives, and to think carefully about that, and to have their values bubble up from their subconscious into their conscious minds, because it's those values that drive the beliefs that they hold and the actions that they take individually and socially. The third aspect of transformative learning we call social knowing, and this is about reflecting critically on how history has shaped and perhaps distorted the way in which we relate to the natural world and to culturally different others. And there's a horrible picture of a beach there covered in plastic waste, plastic bottles. And the question is not so much what, well, the question is, why did the person throw the plastic bottle on the ground? Now, don't just blame the person, but what about the person who made the plastic bottles, the companies? Why did they do that? What is their interest? It's a profit motive, obviously. They're going to produce certain goods in our consumer society and convince us through marketing and advertising to buy them and use them. But where's the sense of social responsibility by the manufacturers to engage in a process of recycling, to promote recycling, and to minimize the amount of plastic waste that we produce on our planet? So social knowing is about helping our students to understand that there is a big manufacturing industry out there, that there's a whole capitalist enterprise, some call it late capitalism, that is currently in crisis with the shutdown of our economic systems. So this economic system that we have is a system that needs to be critically analysed, and we need to understand that we can't just blame the individual for their habit, but those habits are promoted by the economic system in which we live. And it hasn't always been thus. You go back to indigenous societies and you see the organic relationship that people have with the natural world around them. I remember going to Bali in 1971. There was no plastic, none whatsoever. It was an organic society. There was lots of leaves and plant material lying on the ground, and that's great. So social knowing, critical social reflection. See that picture on the bottom there about pointing fingers? I think that's really important. We're not just pointing fingers at who's to blame. We're also, at the same time, this is bringing self-knowing into play, asking ourselves, what is our responsibility? How are we contributing to the challenges and problems in the world? So taking a more positive perspective here, how are we going to move forward towards a better world? And this is the role of visionary knowing, particularly developing an ethical standpoint about how the world could be a better place. That's a sort of a hypothetical. How could it be? You can dream, you can imagine, you can idealize, you can have unlimited ideas and passion behind them. And then the next part of that is, what should it be like? Bringing values and ethical standpoint to bear to actually say, okay, now this is what I believe how the world should be like in the future. And if we take a sustainable development perspective, which is we should ensure that the world we leave behind is a better place for our children and their children and so on. We call this an intergenerational perspective. So in developing a vision, we need to think about the future, the intergenerational perspective, and help our children to develop a vision of the world of being a better place. And there's no single best definition here. I throw that open to all educators to think about and to discuss and to bring their own value systems to bear in trying to work out what a better world would be like. And then finally, if all this sounds like armchair theorizing, and it probably is, this is where what we say the rubber hits the road. This is where we get traction. This is called practical knowing, and it's about developing in our students a sense of what is called agency. And agency is a commitment and a willingness and a self-belief to help make the world a better place, to actually go out there and to do something. What actions can I take in my home, in my local community, that's going to promote the cause of sustainable development? So transformative learning is about helping the children to develop self-knowledge, social, cultural knowledge, relational knowledge and understandings relating to nature, relating to others, developing a vision of how the world could and should be a better place, and then taking action individually, with friends, with family, with community, and at the highest levels of government internationally to make the world a better place. And we need to have a conversation about that so that we come to some sort of a common agreement, because, you know, we must collaborate internationally in order to address the global challenges that are really pressing upon us. So I don't mean to present transformative learning in a linear sense. Nothing necessarily comes first. If you think about that circle and you draw lines between each one of those elements of transformative learning, there's 5 by 4 by 3 by 2 by 1 combinations of any one of those coming first. So in our teaching practice, we can move from one to another, and they all interact and intersect. I've just taken them apart today, almost like a matrix, to make each one of them a significant element of transformative learning in its own right. But really, as educators, our creative, pedagogical and curriculum challenge is to say, how do we interact, how do we integrate these elements of transformative learning in our teaching practice? Which raises the question of, how do you do this? It's all very well to sit here and theorize and say, this is how we could and should do things, but how, in fact, do you break into the stranglehold of existing curricula in universities, in teacher education programs, in school systems with national assessment systems demanding a certain content and a certain set of tests? How do we produce new teachers who are going to go out and perhaps disrupt and transform the existing curricula and assessment systems? That's the question I think that is on everybody's lips. And it's certainly a question that I've been asking. And what I've been able to delight in is to see that my graduates have gone out into their universities, into their teacher education programs, and they've made amazing attempts, progress, to put these ideas into practice. So I'll just touch on the first two quickly, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in TERG Indonesia to address the third element. There is a book which you are welcome to buy. I would love you to do so. It's from the publisher Brill, and it's an edited book with chapters by many of the people who are attending today on how they engaged in transformative learning during postgraduate studies. So in this case, we have transformative learning for the professional development of teachers who become leaders back in their institutions. And I could name many of them, but you can see on TERG Indonesia, we have a good number there. We have Bal from Nepal, we have Nalini coming in from South Africa, and I better stop naming names because I'll leave people out. So what we've got here is the opportunity to move away from research as a scientific enterprise, and that's the positivistic view, and to embrace new paradigms of research which allow us to bring our subjectivities and our values into the foreground and to critically analyse them by using narrative and the arts and imagery and all sorts of wonderful new tools that we have available to us in educational research that have become available to us over the last 3 or 4 decades, until we're now in a position where we can integrate all of these different approaches to educational research to improve, to focus not just on the world outside of us, but the world inside our own inner worlds. And that's really the key to changing the world outside, is to change the world inside first. So this type of research has got powerful tools for transforming our inner worlds and subsequently the external world. So I think it was Gandhi who said, if you want to change the world, change yourself first. So I would encourage you to buy that book, because there's lots and lots of really good examples of how students have done masters and doctoral degrees in the role of transformative learning. It's about their trials and tribulations. It's not an easy thing to do. It's also about their achievements, and it's about how they went back to their universities and their places of work and struggled to make a difference. We've been also working in school systems, and I must mention my good colleague, who happens also to be my wife, Dr. Elizabeth Lilly Taylor, who really brought ethics into my life when she did her PhD about 15 years ago. So we've been collaborating around the notion of bringing the arts into the STEM sphere, the STEM multi-curriculum sphere, because the arts allow us to bring in ethics and rhetoric and creativity, amongst other things. And this book is going to be published later this year, possibly early next year, with examples of educators, STEM educators, who have taken the arts into their own practices and engaged in processes of transformative learning with a focus on sustainable futures, sustainable development. I won't dwell on this morning. This is for another time, another seminar. But just briefly, one of the tools that we use, and there are many different tools, is called ethical dilemma stories. These are stories about, say, children engaging in the world and finding it full of all sorts of ethical dilemmas, such as I've just found a turtle which was thought to be extinct. It lives in a little ecosystem which is about to be destroyed for housing development. What's my feelings about this? What's my thoughts about this? How do I act in relation to this? Or another one, which I'll just mention briefly, is the subject of a PhD which was completed about a year ago by a science educator in Queensland, where he was teaching genetics to his year 10 class in his science classroom, and he wanted to discuss one of the ethical impacts of genetics. There's another ghost in the machine, which is genetically modified food. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How do you decide? So he brought the focus on genetically modified food into his teaching of genetics using ethical dilemma stories, which involves the children in processes of critical reflection, discussion, clarifying their values, and getting together to collaborate on making decisions about what they think is genetically modified food a good thing or a bad thing. So this is a process of engaging the students in those elements of transformative learning that I laid out a moment ago. Self-knowing, social and critical knowing, relational knowing, and so on. So that book, again, will be available. That little picture on the front cover, I've adapted from quantum theory. Those are quantum particles that are influencing each other, and that indicates that around the world there are various interpretations of bringing the arts into STEM education. So there's a lot of interesting and exciting stuff going on in the world. Down the bottom there, STREAM, R stands for religion, and that's going on in Southeast Asian countries. Okay, undergraduate teacher preparation. Now this is a specialty of Yuli and Neni and Mangara and Susie, and I think Rivka is also beginning to get involved in this as well. So this is where I want to hand over to them, I think to Yuli first up, to talk a little bit about the practical side. How is she and how are the others putting transformative learning into their teaching practices, and what's the impact been on their students? And just before I do so, let me just say that there's some wonderful projects that I've become aware of where student teachers in the undergraduate level are taking on various projects and taking them out into schools and trialling them as part of their research. In that process, they're developing a reflective practice. Some of the topics include a green chemistry, ethno-mathematics, culturally responsible teaching, ethically aware mathematics, and mindfulness. So there's some wonderful things going on in Indonesia at the moment with our TERG Indonesia colleagues. And at this point, Yuli, I would like to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So everyone, we would like to share what we are doing after we learning about the transformative education, especially during our PhD study, because what I'm doing in Indonesia is regarding the framework that I have been developed throughout my PhD study. Probably I need to move forward. So after my turn, it will be Pak Mangara from Universitas Negeri Medan, and there is also Bu Susi Fitri probably share also about the reflective practice, and then also Rifka from Universitas Negeri Malang also would like to share her thinking and experience as well. So what I'm doing during the values of transformative teaching is basically it is developed by the theoretical framework of the Habermas human interest in the technical interest and then practical interest, and also that mention about the emancipatory interest. What I would like to do is the last one, the emancipatory interest, and then I use some of the part is in Indonesian language, so the probably my students and also the teachers can understand. So what I understand is if you focusing on the technical interest, you just only focusing on completing the subject matter, the content knowledge, and then the list of subject that you have to finish. And then when you move forward to the practical interest, it will be meaningful learning experience. We call it throughout this policy of the minister, we call it pembelajaran bermakna. And then throughout the last one, it will be emancipatory interest. It is the empowerment. And then even though these three values is interact each other, we would like to put focusing on the student as an agent of change. So we need to, as I'm a teacher educator, so I need to realize that my student will become a teachers, and they will empower their student and develop the knowledge of the student. So it is very important for myself that as a teacher educators, I need to empower my student to become a reflective teacher, to become an agent of change, and then thinking of the better future of the world. So this dialectical thinking has been developed throughout my teaching, because sometimes I need to just finish up the content knowledge. So I will move to the technical interest. So this kind of values is just not only one that we take, but also we need to negotiate it between the values. And the second one is about the curriculum image. The curriculum image itself, throughout the traditional and progressive, it needs to be move forward as well, because sometimes we need to, like myself in chemistry, I need to consider that my student need to have the skills in the laboratory. But at the same time, I also need to develop their awareness of the environment. So this kind of values also need to be dialectical in ways of implementing in our context, especially in the assessment and then achieving the indicators of the curricula as well. And then it is more practical that I would like to share with you. I have the, Peter already mentioned about the 5 values, about the cultural self-knowing and the relational knowing, the relationship with others, critical knowing, visionary, and then ethical knowing, as also the knowing in action. We have to do the action to develop, to a change, to empower ourselves and also the others. If you would like to learn more about these theories, you can read through this the book. And then Peter usually teach us the metaphor of butterfly as a transformative. We not only become bigger, but we also become more beautiful. So it's not only the quantity, but also the quality. So if you become a teacher, educators, or if you become a student, you need to be aware that you are in the position, in the identity of yourself, and then you have to also contribute to others, relationship with others, and then the future, and also you have to do the action. So it's quite challenging because in our curricula is more focusing on the content knowledge. So, but at the same time, we need to adding values in our knowledge as well. And it is my principle. There is probably there in this room, it will be 35 of my students right now join me. And then what I'm doing that they need to understand their identity. If you ask them, I give them the task to reflect why they would like to become a teacher. If you would like to become a teacher, what kind of teacher that you would like to be. So I teach curricula, I teach the assessment, I also teach the misconception. So that's kind of question is really important to understand in which stage that my student teacher to understand themselves as their individual and also their future profession as a teacher. And the second one, I always asking about the reflection. If you teach the curricula, and then I will ask them what your experience regarding the curricula, and then what is your opinion about the better curricula in the future. So this kind is reflection is happen in my classroom. So even though I teach chemistry, I usually also ask them to do the reflection. And then the third one is about the meaningful learning experience. For me, it's very important. It doesn't matter if you spend a large amount of time and then the student didn't understand anything, not only understand the knowledge, but also they need to be empowered. That why empowerment is very important for me. So they not only to think to pass the exam, because for me is the marking is not everything. Marking score and is not everything. For me is that they transform to better person for the world, and then they transform to be better person of become a teacher is more important. And then I would like to mention about the dialectical thinking. I just cannot say like the teacher center is the best and then student center is the best and then you cannot do the teacher center. So in a ways of different angle, you need to put your dialectical thinking. Sometimes you just need to finish up the content, because in the curricula, for example, in chemistry, you have to finish it, the chemical bonding, and then at the same time, you also need to engage the student in the critical issues of the environment. So we need to negotiate. We have, for example, for one semester, we can just manage the kind of students' learning experience throughout empowerment, throughout the conceptual understanding, even throughout the narrow understanding in ways of remember things in chemistry, like the chemical elements and so on. And the last one is about the ethics of care. For me, caring my students, it is the way to empower my students. So if I didn't care of themselves as individuals and also as my students, I just cannot empower them. Empower them. So for me, the values that I have constructed during my PhD, so I have developed that these 5 values is developed myself as a teacher. So what I'm doing in the classroom is mostly getting framework by these values. And then I would like to share my experience throughout my teaching, and then probably later on in the future when we discuss about what is the transformative education research. If we usually using the language of quantitative research and then qualitative research, and then we need to understand where is the transformative education research, but we will do it right now later on. But I mean, what I'm doing right now is regarding the research itself. So the first is social emotional learning. What I'm doing is the emotion, the empathy in the classroom is important. If you ask my students sometimes in the classroom, I just asking even in the chemistry lesson, how do you feel today? Probably they will think, why Bu Yuli asking about the feeling? It is not the psychologist topic, but it is the way I teach my students. And then if you would like to engage the students in the issues, for example, even I teach curricula, the issue should be complex and it should be controversial. So what I'm doing is I usually using the debate, dilemmas. They have to choose something, and Peter already mentioned about dilemma stories, and it have to be involved the values, the moral, the ethics. In Indonesia, we have so many dilemmas, and then the student will be faced that kind of dilemmas throughout the times. And then it's also very important for the approach of social emotional learnings that the student need to do reflection and their values. If you give the case study, the study casus you give the students, and they need to reflect on their own values, what their perspective about the case. And then it's also related to our character education, and then in our curricula, how develop the character. If you see the Bloom taxonomy, for example, the character development is quite long process. If you would like to develop the students' character, they have to know what kind of values that they have. And then the last one is, even though my student learn chemistry, they have to contextualize their knowledge in the local, the national, and the globals. They just cannot use the chemistry knowledge to understand the context, but they have to use different kind of issue throughout their learning. And it is the critical issue that usually I use in the classroom, and then also used by my students that doing the research in this kind of topics like dilemma story, social emotional learning. So they need to understand like the plastic issues, and then global warming, and then genetic modified food. So we can connect this issue to the content knowledge. So for example, in chemistry, we usually using the polymer topics and then using the plastic issue as the context. And then the second ones, I will explain about the cultural responsive transformative teaching. It's developed by myself and Pak Ridwan. And it is basically values of the transformative learning as well, and then several ideas from several reference. So I'm making connection throughout the culture. The culture, not only the culture practice, we call it in chemistry as ethnochemistry, but also we need to understand what kind of students' characteristic. The student need to understand about the self-identification. It is reflecting of the self-understanding. And then it's also the culture understanding. Student also challenge in collaboration, critical reflective thinking. At the last, they need to understand what kind of transformation that they have, they already there, they have. It is not only the understanding, but also the values that they have. And then it is the example of the second phase of the teaching model that I developed. So for the cultural understanding is also not only the values, but also the context, the cultural practice. It is the way that I integrate the content of chemistry throughout the teaching practice. So for example, it is lime. In Indonesia, we use lime to wash it is like keris is the traditional knife that Indonesia have. So I need to explain what kind of chemical reaction in the washing of the keris, and then the student just getting surprised that the indigenous knowledge is related to the chemistry content as well. And it is crocodile braid, it is the Jakarta values. It also related to the chemical compound of sodium carbonate that related to the hydrolysis and the exit and base. So I try to making connection between what students learn in the curricula, but also the context of their culture, their identity, and also the society in the issues of the related to the chemistry. And the third one, it is the system thinking. I call it system thinking, that I read through the theoretical framework that we just cannot use one of the knowledge to solving the problem. So if you see several journals mention about the system thinking, you can see how different kind of knowledge is using to analyze the issues and so on. So at the moment, what I develop is the integrating the dilemma story. So the student understand the dilemma of plastic, for example. And then Indonesia, for example, is contribute to the world problems of the plastics. And then the student engage in the stories, what they are doing to solve this kind of problems. And then some of the students just find it out. So we didn't give them the solution, like the solution of the plastic is biodegradable plastic. It's not the way we are teaching. So the way we are teaching, it should be inquiry learning, inquiry teaching. That's the student need to find out what is the solution. And then throughout the learning experience, the student find out the biodegradable plastic is one of the way So I integrate to the STEM project. So they develop the banana skin and the other things, and the project has been developed throughout the time. So some of the project developed regarding the laundry issue, the pollution and so on. And the challenge is to develop this kind of teaching approach is you need to find out the dilemma stories, the dilemmas issue, and then you need to solve the problem throughout the STEM project. And then the last one, I cannot ignore the student understanding, because in chemistry is very important. If you find out in chemistry everything, we call it misconception. But I don't want to trap into only focusing on the scoring. So I would like to understand how the student develop the information processing. So the cognitive process, and then I need to understand what is their prior learning experience, the cognitive structure, the mental state, and so on. So what my students doing throughout their research as well, we develop this kind of pictures. So not only the score, so we need to understand, if you ask the student one of the concept, for example, the ionization, how they describe in their mind about the ionization. You will amaze one of my students doing research in the certain area in Indonesia. They can making connection between the cultures and understanding. For example, it is fish and related to the ionization concept in chemistry. Why it is related? Because they live around the river. So they're making a metaphor analogy, for example, regarding the concept of understanding. And then the last one also regarding the other culture, we call it tenun. So they're making connection between the concept of equilibrium with the tenun itself. It's like the cultural practice. So the way we are doing, for example, for 1 minute, can you explain about the exit? So the student can mention the concept they really they remember throughout the process, so we can understand how they construct their understanding throughout the concept. So it is the thing that I have done, and until now throughout my dissertation, that Palmer Parker is one of the inspiring people that mention about good teaching. It cannot be reduced to the technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and the integrity of the teachers. And then teaching itself, it's the art of the changing of the brain. Thank you very much, Peter. So probably I need to give time to Pak Mangara or Rifka. Pak Mangara?
Okay. Okay.
Yes, please. So I already done stop my sharing, so you can share it.
Okay, thank you. With this slide, I want to share a simple case in my teaching experience about how question that we raise may raise our awareness. When I say our awareness, I mean not only our students, but also the teacher as well, or ourselves. Most of teachers, at least in our area, think that they have too much workload. And because of that, they limit their responsibility for only delivering the content only. But I myself agree to this statement that teaching is a work of art. So this is a conversation I have with my student in my class one time. At that time, my student asked that he has tried to use cooperative learning in his class, but it didn't work well. The class was noisy, but they didn't learn anything. So he think that lecturing is better than any constructive approach. By having this question raised in my class, I think there might be something happen behind it. So I want to ask my student to reflect his practice at that time. So I asked him, how did you do this cooperative learning in your class? And then the response of my student is, by letting the students to learn in group discussion, as usually happen in cooperative learning. Having this response, I asked him again, does the learning with group discussion means cooperative learning? So this last question that I asked actually can be seen as a conflict cognitive for the students, which may trigger a transformation in their knowledge scheme. Most of teacher, at least those who I met before, thinks that discussion group is the main thing and the only thing in cooperative learning. Then after asking that question, I bring my students back to the definition of cooperative learning. So for a person who learns mathematics, I see that definition is very important. So by reflecting this definition, I want to raise my students' awareness of their practice. Cooperative learning is a teaching model or strategy that is characterized by cooperative task, goal, and reward structures, and requires students to be actively engaged in discussion, debate, tutoring, and teamwork. This is the definition that I use in the teaching experience by Aaron and Kilcher. So what I want to propose from this definition is that doing discussion group is not the only thing in cooperative learning. There must be cooperative task, cooperative goal, and reward structures, which is sometimes forget by the teacher. By being aware of this original practice of cooperative learning, then we continue the discussion with the about the teacher responsibility to help students learn not only to teach, which is emphasizing teachers' ethical responsibility in responding what the students need. So what values can we learn from this experience? The first is that we need to understand before we want to judging something. And then the most important thing that I want to emphasize is the role of question. Students' questions may reveal or expose themselves or their position, their standpoint, which provides an opportunity for teacher to guide instead of making another judgment. So by trying to understand the questions and something behind the question that the students raise, we can understand our students better. And then the second, teachers' questions may also help the students to reflect on their practice or on their understanding. Thus, they may aware of their practice, their understanding, and also their responsibility. But not only that, it brings also something to myself. By being exposed to experiences allows me to reflect to my own practice and experiences as well. It stimulates my own awareness of myself and my practice because I was challenged. If my students did that kind of things, that kind of practice, how did I do my professional practice? And it pushed me to take another steps on my self-transformation route. So if we engage ourselves in this transformative teaching and learning, the transformation is not only for our students, but also for ourselves. Thank you, Peter, and everybody. That's what I want to share at this moment.
Thank you very much, Mangara. Thank you. Back to Susie.
Thank you, Pak Mangara. Rifka, could you please to share your experience?
Okay, I'll try to present my presentations. Thank you. I think I have trouble with my presentations. Could you help me to present my PPT, Bu Yuli?
I just try to find out your presentation and wait.
Okay.
But can you share the file in the Zoom as well?
Okay, I'll try to do it.
Because Bu Susi, probably you can start like Peter answers one of question where we are waiting for the file.
I have a trouble. So.
Bu Susi.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, Bu Susi,
Okay.
probably Peter can answer one of the question while I'm waiting for the document as well.
Okay. I will tell you about the transformative education that I have experienced in my class. I'm not coming from the STEM program studies. I am from the guidance and counseling. So this is very much different from maybe most of you. I teach in undergraduate and and postgraduate in education faculty. I bring issue of identity in my class. For example, in teaching family counseling and multicultural counseling, and also the culture studies, I ask my students about their identity. We usually talk about 5 social identity, like our ethnic, our religion, and gender, and sexuality, and social class. So by having reflection on their experience on those social classes, on those social identities, for example, who are you as a person from the certain ethnic group? What's your experience? Do you experience discrimination? Do you experience privilege, for example? And also about the experience of religion, for example, how do you construct your religious identity? And also how you construct gender identity, your sexual knowledge or experience, for example. And we also talk about how you construct your identity in social class. Do you have discrimination on your social class? How do you see people from the other social class? So we are talking about this, and we are also I also ask our students not only to reflect on their experience on those social identities, but I also ask my students to interview people from different social identity. For example, in these 2 years, we choose 3 three ethnic identity, that is Papua and Chinese and Arabs, because these three identities very much having certain social issues like discriminations, like stereotyping. So I asked my students to interview these people from these ethnics and talk about how does it feel to be in that ethnic group in Indonesia, what kind of the discrimination that they experience, do they see any other privilege in that ethnic situation, and what is the issues that they have in mental health, because I'm in mental health area. And there's interesting that when we are talk about this, it seems there's some issues come up. For example, I might not think that, for example, gender-based violence is really massive as we thought, but actually it is. I mean, there is in two classes, in certain class, in one classes, I find out that almost like 20 or 25 of the students experience what we call a sexual harassment, either in public or in a family. That's quite shocking because the number is so, for me, it's so huge. So it's transforming, not only talk about how the issue that they are going to face as a counselor, but I'm thinking about that we also have the course that integrate and process that kind of trauma in our students. It never been done before. It's coming from the reflection and the talk and the discussion that we have. And one other interesting thing that made me realize about our social identity of a teacher, of in this case is a counselor, for example, that my students not having problem in interviewing people from lower and middle class person, but they have some kind of nerve and afraid and anxious about interviewing people from upper class, because they have some certain stereotyping and certain prejudice about the upper class people. So it makes me think that maybe it made me think about in what kind of social class actually our teachers, and in this case our students. And it makes me realize why, in for example, our students maybe find some difficulties in teaching upper social school, for example. They have some stereotyping, prejudice, like our student is snob, our students is only see people from materialistic point of view. And I think it might be coming from their social class identity. So those what I do in my classes, and I think it's very interesting because it make us wonder and also make us think to how to make a difference in our school, and it also make our understanding why certain mental health happen in our students in our school, and it also make it makes us understand why certain mental health is not processing or even not looking by the teacher, because of teacher only focus on like Yuli said, only finishing content, but maybe teacher not realizing that students having like domestic abuse, having sexual harassment, dealing with social class discrimination, dealing with ethnic discrimination. Also, they facing what I think as a conservative religious thought in their family, which prohibit them to doing certain thing that is actually important for their education. And I think that is the interesting thing that we are doing applying transformative values in our classes. Okay,
Wow.
maybe.
Thank you, Bu Susi. If you come to Bu Susi classroom, you will know what kind of the creative teaching approach that she has done, and it's just amazing. So probably I will share what Rivka has. Rivka, are you ready?
I'm ready, inshallah.
Good.
Thank you, Bu Yuni.
Yes.
So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, I'm Rivka Fahrunisa. I'm from Universitas Negeri Malang. I am one of the lecturers in Biology Education's department. So, I'm a new member in TERG. It's actually different with another member of the TERG who were Prof. Peter's PhD member. I started to be infected by transformative learning when I had a non-degree training program for a month in Murdoch University with Professor Peter a couple months ago. So gladly and proudly, currently the virus of transformative learning successfully injected our new curriculum program for master and doctoral degree in biology educations in Universitas Negeri Malang, and it became our new approach to develop the courses. So in these presentations, I will share to you about a brief explanations about my experience starting to engage with transformative learning. Next slide. So talking about practice in transformative learning, I might not have done some massive change in my classroom practice like what the other members have done, but as have alluded by Peter in his presentations, that the world is divided into two, inside and outside world. So first step I took to change the word inside. So the word of myself, like what Prof. Peter conveyed in the presentations, that there are two words. First is external word. External word comprised by object, event, and natural laws, and the internal words, something that we cannot change. Something that we cannot change instantly, but we can change it. So here I show you about the first step of stepping towards to transformative learning, what I called it as new framework of higher order thinking. You may have been familiar with higher order thinking by reading some of the reference from the other researchers. But in this type of higher order thinking in transformative learning, divided into some aspect. First, critical self-reflections, and then metaphoric imagining, dialectical reasoning, spiritual awakening, and re-envisioning. So the three of the aspect here that I have highlighted, that's those are which I try to press it more in my teaching practice. Okay, so next slide. So Peter has alluded as well about that we are facing the serious global challenge. As biology lecturer, global environmental problem has captured my intentions more than the others. So to transform my teaching, I'm not just trying to for my students to know about those problems, but I also trying to convince them to take part to be the problem solver. So I will not explain about those kind of the problem. Okay, next slide. And besides to solve the global challenge or the global problems, UN or United Nations has published 17 sustainable development goals, which they believe and we believe as well can solve those problems. And as you can see that education is become one, the quality of education become one of the goal. You may see, yeah, in the fourth point, there is quality education with these goals. Even though educations only take one part of the 17 goals, I believe that with this one goal can strongly contribute to reach the rest of the goals of the Sustainable Development Program. Next slide. Okay. Another issue is the 20th century teachers characteristic. So here I present you some of the characters that we have to develop in ourselves as a 21st century teacher. And those all what I'm trying to construct in myself. So in my personal view, nowadays we have to eliminate our perspective that teacher should know about everything because we cannot compete with internet. So we have to maximize our another role other than transmitter of the knowledge. So we have to more, for example, inspire our student by showing them our best capacity as a teacher, as a citizen, as a worshiper, and as a whole human. Thus, there are three particular things that underpinned my teaching practice. So the first that I have showed to you is a global challenge, particularly global environment issues, and then the sustainable development goals. And the last one is the 21st century teachers, especially to be an inspirator. As I said, I cannot change the world outside, but what I can change is I change myself with the method that I called as mindfulness. So next. So Kabat-Zinn 1994 defines that mindfulness as paying attention in particular way on purpose. So the purpose that I addressed is the three things that I've mentioned before. So global challenge, sustainable development, and become inspiring teachers. I take it all of my teaching practice and I adapted some methods to deliver the transformative learning, such as promoting reflective practice, like what my colleague just explained to you, like taking the critical issues about global challenge and also the cultural understandings. Okay, next.
Next.
Why should be mindful? So we can see that there are different between we teach with mindfulness and without mindfulness. If it's only stimulus without mindfulness, we only will get reactions. But if we take mindfulness in the process, we will produce a response. The reactions and response is different. Reactions is typically quick, without much thought or aggressive. And on the other hand, the responsive is thought out, calm, and non-threatening. Reactions typically provokes more reactions, perpetuating a long line of hatefulness with nothing accomplished. But a response typically provokes discussions, perpetuating healthy discussions, debate, even that leads resolutions. So all in all, in doing transformative teaching and learning, we shall have a mindfulness of ourselves. In other words, mindfulness, in my opinion, is the first step to be a transformer. I think that's all for me. I will give it back to you, Bu Susi. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rivka. Bu Susi, please. Bu Susi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rivka, and thank you, Bu Yuli. And Peter, I will get back to you. There is some questions from the audience.
And many of it.
Yeah, here from Sylvie and Echo, there's two similar questions. The question is that because of COVID-19, because of COVID-19, how the transformative learning perspective in seeing this pandemic? And the second is how do STEM education and transformative learning in pandemic situation? That is the questions.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good, thank you. Big question. The implications of COVID-19 pandemic from a transformative learning perspective, I think that's the question. There's some very rich data available at the moment around the world in terms of understanding what is the nature of the beast at the molecular level. There's great opportunities for bringing that into a science classroom to understand. We've seen those photographs of the molecule, the so-called molecule, the molecular structure. It's actually very beautiful when it's covered. So there's an aesthetic to this disease at the molecular level. Of course, at the human level, it's ugly as you can imagine. So that's kind of a disciplinary knowledge perspective. Now, if you stand outside of that and you look at the critical social learning that's available, wow, there's a huge amount of stuff. I mean, you can, actually, before I get there, let me go back to mathematics, Mangara's favorite area. The whole notion of the exponential spread of this disease through populations and those graphs that we've seen with logarithmic scales on the y-axis, another fantastic teaching opportunity that brings the concept of exponential growth world. Now, if we move, as I was going to a moment ago, into the social implications and applications, wow, think about the ethics associated with this. How about how governments are trying to protect, on the one hand, the economy, on the other hand, the people? What an incredible ethical dilemma they face. And so there's no simple single solution. This is where what Yuli was talking about, dialectical thinking. How do you balance these conflicting opposites? The importance of the so-called economy as though it's part of the external world. It isn't really, is it? It's part of our internal world's economy. But and then you can look at the successful failure of governments to do so. And I think America is a very good example of a government that is struggling because of certain political values, social values in the government that is constraining the success of the health specialists, the scientific specialists. So there you've got an interesting dilemma. On the one hand, you've got political values. On the other hand, you've got scientific and medical and health values. And they seem to be in conflict. So, wow, wonderful opportunities to bring transformative learning into play, particularly relational learning, the socio-cultural learning, the ethical standpoint. I think this is a topic that is of great importance. And if we can bring the outside world into the classroom, it makes students far more engaged because it becomes personally meaningful for them. And that's one of the principles of constructivist teaching that Yuli was talking about. So you can take, my mind is overflowing with ideas about how transformative learning can be brought to bear to understand, to deconstruct, to critique, and maybe to then propose certain pathways forward beyond the pandemic, because it opens up questions about what are the assumptions that we currently hold about our society that maybe we need to revise, maybe we need to revision our societies, our communities, our nations, our role globally in the geopolitical sense. Do we want the world to go back to what it was, or is this a turning point? Is this a wonderful opportunity for a paradigm shift in our understanding about ourselves and our societies and the relationships between those different societies? So, you got to make the best of the worst. And in this case, the pandemic is the worst, but we can make the best of it by taking a transformative learning perspective. Let me pause there, Susie, on that question. What was the second question?
I think the second question is already answered because it's quite similar.
Okay, good.
Okay, I may add your explanation. In mental health field, for example, we are also can discuss about the social identity in COVID-19. For example, who is the most effect of this COVID-19? For example, when we have the work from home activities, we know that there is a gender issues here, since that domestic work usually deal with women. For example, I think mothers now is the one who is very exhausted with this kind of situation. Also daughters, for example, because in our gender values, daughters and mothers consider the person who has to deal with domestic issue too.
Yes.
And I think this COVID-19 also can help us discuss about the privilege of classes. For example, we know in Indonesia are very much concerned about how the people who being laid off in work will be dealing with this kind of situation, and whether the social classes will be influenced for you to get the disease or not to get the disease, or get the help or not get the help. I think that social classes also dealing with this. And I think the identity of religion, we can also talk about the identity of religion. For example, what kind of religious coping that we can deal with this. It is helping or not helping. It is bad coping strategies religiously or not. I think it's all, we can also talk about this with our students. And also, since the domestic abuse and domestic violence is raising and sexual harassment is raising in this pandemic situation, it's at the issue of how family dealing with this kind of pandemic issue. And I think that's also the awareness that we as a educator or teacher should aware of, because when if we only deal with the content in our education, we are not aware that, for example, maybe our student dealing with the issues of mental health, for example, lonely in your family, dealing with a family conflict, sibling rivalry, we're just adding in this pandemic situation. And I think that's also the thing that we as a teacher need to be aware of.
Good point, Susie. And the domestic issue is a very important one. You've got two different views on this. One is from men saying, oh, it's lovely to be home with our children. We have a much better relationship now. On the other hand, some men are saying, I can't cope with the domestic scene. I feel like I'm, the quarantine is killing me. I've got to get out of here. So that raises the question of identity and the role of men in society and the role of men in families.
Right, right. And the other question is for all the panels, not only Peter. The question is from Hadi Hasbi. According to you all analysis, what is the biggest obstacle faces by teachers to change the behavior learning approach to transformative learning, especially teachers in Indonesia? Maybe you really want to start? The biggest obstacles to change behavior learning approach to transformative learning.
Yeah, it is because that Peter mentioned about the 5 values of transformative learning. So for example, I read through the question about asking how to be implemented in this context and this context. Please have a look at 5 values, because each of us can take different things. Like, can you see that what I'm taking, and then Pak Mangara taking, and Rifka taking, even Bu Susi taking different things. So that 5 values, for example, actually the challenge in Indonesia is the identity of the teachers and the student itself. They need to realize who they are in the ways of, if you are a teacher that only focusing, oh sorry, focusing on the subject matter, completed the subject and finished the curricula, that's all. And it means you are that kind of teachers. But if you would like to shift forward, and then you would like to become emancipatory teachers and then reflective teacher, you need to engage in different kind of effort, like bringing the issues and then contextualize the students' learning. So I think the identity, shifting the paradigms, we need to do it first. That's why the Transformative Education Research Group is doing, because we cannot change everything. So what we can do, we change ourselves. And then as a teacher educator, I change my students. My student teachers, if they being empowered teacher, they can change the students. So that multiply effects is the way we would like to change the education. And then probably Bal can share the experience as well regarding the context in Nepal, or Busra or Nalini and the other. I think I see Ruchi as well in here to share what kind of what we can do to transform the teachers and the educational practice in the countries. Thank you, Mbak. Bal, do you want to add something?
Okay, thank you, Yuli. I think, the question, the answer is in the question itself, because the challenge is not just one. There are many challenges. As Yuli and other colleagues showed, some of the evidences that the work can start from inside the classroom, and it can take ripple effect. So in my experience in our country, the emphasis of curriculum as subject matter, as far as school and university education is concerned, the dominant image of curriculum as subject matter appears to be one of the challenges, together with the prevalent culture in the system that teaching is conceived to be the completion of the course. This is all about the goal of education. What do we mean by education? Whatever it is, it can be English language teaching. There are questions related to English as foreign language, and also in science education, in maths education. So this is actually the external problem. The internal problem is, I think, it lies in ourselves, how we see our identity as teachers. Yuli also pointed quite appropriately. So what do I mean by what type of teacher I'm going to be, or what does it mean to be a teacher. So if we begin from there, probably we can start doing a little bit piece by piece, little by little, not just jumping into changing the system, which is not in our control. So at this stage, what we do in Nepal, especially in my university, for example, I was talking to Peter some weeks back that in our university, we don't have a standard approach. We have departments, schools, and they are self-organizing system. And sometimes this is a challenge, but this is something good thing that, for example, last year we started a STEAM education program, and we sort of conceptualized by ourselves, and we were not that much constrained by the hierarchy. Of course, there are hierarchies, but we were not that much constrained by the hierarchy. So this is our university's case, but this is not the same in other universities. For example, there is a big university, and there the system is quite different. Okay, so top-down hierarchical system. And this is the case of university. As far as school education is concerned, Nepal has recently revised its curricula. It's in the process, and they introduced integrated curricula in early grades, in grade 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, the content load has been slashed down. We need to see how this is going to be, what is the impact of this. I think there will be positive impact, so that teachers will not be just focusing on content, but also they focus on transversal competence, this 21st century skills that is needed to be developed by students. I think there are lots of changes taking place, but the change is not that fast. It is slowly. It takes place slowly, but we are very, very positive as far as our experience is concerned.
Okay, thank you, Bal. Probably Nalini, you would like to share something from your country, and then there is Reka as well. Reka probably have something, and then Busra. Nalini, are you there?
Good morning. Yes, I'm here. Can you see me, Yuli?
What time is that now?
It's now almost 6 a.m. So it's still a little bit sleepy. Okay. So I can add from my perspectives, and I know that my colleagues are here. I can see them. So I'm going to ask them to also share some of their perspectives. And, so I work in staff development, and I use transformative learning a lot in terms of my own underpinning philosophies that guide my practice. And, what I'd like to add is that while we want to bring about, drastic change, we want to see the system change. However, as Bal mentioned, and I think Peter and yourself as well, that there are a number of forces that impact on us that is beyond us. And I always recall Peter explaining transformative learning using his finger, so when Peter pointed the finger outwards, and he used it in one of the examples, the outward finger shows the number of other forces that impact on a person's practice. And I think what transformative learning is doing is that it's saying there are 3 other fingers that are pointing inwards. And what that's encouraging us to do is to look at our own selves, at our own practices, and at our own assumptions. Because when we teach in higher education, whatever aspect you're teaching on, you are making assumptions about a number of things, about who our students are, their kind of learning abilities and needs, who the academics are that we work with, what our contexts are. And I think that's an important part for me in terms of transformative learning, is actually we can't bring about the drastic changes. And as Peter mentioned also from Mahatma Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. And again, Yuli, going back on what you spoke about, the butterfly effect. When I change, I can bring about the change with my colleagues, with my students, and we cascade this kind of effect down the line. And I think it's about engaging together with like-minded people to bring about these kinds of changes we want to encourage and see in our world. And, you know, I put the point about COVID-19 and what COVID-19 is doing at the moment to a lot of us. It's encouraging us to stop and to reflect and to ask these difficult questions. But my question is, why did we need COVID-19 to do that? And I think that answer lies in where we are in our context, in our universities, and acknowledging the fact that in a university, we have a number of different variables and forces that impact on what you teach, how you teach, and how you engage. So I think it's a time to stop, to reflect, to go inside ourselves. You know, Sadhguru, and Peter knows, Sadhguru talks about the inner engineering. So colleague Shobha is here, and I'm going to ask Shobha to raise her question because she raises some important questions about knowledge as well. So Sadhguru says, you know, we are the kind of technology. We have the ability to bring about the changes that we want to see. We cannot rely on the changes to come from our universities or for other people. So I think that change starts with us, and I try to encourage that in my engagements with my staff, but I want to acknowledge that this is also not an easy activity. Transformation is a long and drawn out process. It requires collaboration, it requires dialogue, it requires people engaging with each other and trying to move the system slowly but surely. Thank you. And I'm going to ask my colleagues that are here in the room to actually just raise some of their questions. And thank you, Peter. Thank you, Yuli and colleagues. This is an amazing seminar. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
So there is a Shobha or Nalini?
Shobha is here. I see Ivan is also here. Please, colleagues, can you just please raise your questions as well?
Okay.
Good morning. Good morning. This is Shobha from DUT in South Africa. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be part of this, for the invite, and for allowing our participation here. I think it's two issues that I'm not sure if they're concerns, but I felt that in our explanations or in our making explicit transformative learning and transformative teaching, there's an underlying assumption that I'm not sure whether we can automatically assume, you know, is equal across every situation in terms of the preparedness, knowledge preparedness of the academic. Now, as you move to, Peter spoke of these lovely contextual possibilities around COVID, for example. You find then that I'm very hesitantly using the word mastery, but you have to have almost a command of the conceptual depth around phenomena in your discipline to be able to negotiate that space, to be able to go. And there's an assumption in the way, there's an assumption that exists. Now, in my situation at the university, we are in different stages of understanding how the knowledge of the discipline itself acts out, and how the reflection on that knowledge and how that is acting out and is an influencing factor on what you do and how you can do it, I think can be brought or maybe should be explicit in the transformative education framework. That's one. And the other one that I was just to bring our context in, we've introduced not so long ago general education, and general education is a way of us bringing these ethics, and you know, Peter spoke about bringing in the values and the ethics and the questioning and the gender-based issues into our curriculum that is very vocationally, professionally based. And as we're going into this mode of we need to save the year and go online, there is conversations about maybe the general education can get parked for a bit and let's get on with the core business. And that alerts, that alerts to prioritizing and evaluating. So as we're in this transition, we run the risk of going right back to being traditional. And what I'm asking is, how do we hold together the important agenda of transformative education while dealing with the panic, and that from a perspective of curriculum developers and academic staff development? Thank you.
Thank you, Soba. So I ask one more. Reka, please, could you please to share?
Thank you, Yuli. Thank you for inviting me to this session first. And yes, I concur with everything what has been said on this forum, and it's been really engaging. And what I feel is we need to be aware as teachers of our practice and make us also, which will make them aware of what they are learning, how they are learning, and what for are they learning, where are they going to use it. And that becomes a continuous process of reflection. And all of us would have moved from student to earlier academic roles or maybe in leadership. At different points of our journeys, we do come across whatever power we have in whichever capacity. It could be writing a unit. So how do we, implement the elements of transformative education in it? Probably that's what is going to bring in the change. But at the same time, all societies are in continuous transformation. None of the society is ever static if we look at the history. And so is education developing. As societies develop, so is education developing. But is it keeping the pace with the change? Today, we are engaging in this platform from different parts of the world. But if I look at the classroom, it hasn't changed much in the last 100 years. The traditional classroom, which we are all craving to go back, and when can we start with teaching even in university? This morning we were talking about it. But yes, we are always living in some constraints, political constraints, the university authorities' constraints, or the constraints given to a teacher by the system, which could be education department or the society they are living in. I was really impressed by the comment about the gender issues, and those gender issues are not only in Asia; they are even in developed world. Yesterday there was a news item that since COVID-19, the male academics have submitted record number of research papers, while as research paper submission from female academics has reduced because for poor ladies, they are looking after doing their household chores, and it's impacting everywhere. And we can't change it overnight, but being at least aware about it, making your next generation, that is going to bring out that transformation. And other bit, which I think, yes, we don't know, we are facing COVID-19 at this moment. It is an adversity. We don't know how and where it will take us. We have to transform this adversity into an opportunity, that too for good. That doesn't mean we have to go to the back or old normal, maybe a new different we have to find. And that's the transformation I will look forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Reka. So, very nice. So we need to have the seminars on gender issues and
yes. I can send you the link. Not surprised.
And valuing one Peter in this discrimination of men, not only the woman.
I don't think it's a gender. It is a construct.
Construct. Yes, it can be. Yeah. Yes, please.
Okay. This one interesting questions from Ivan. Transformative education entails some form of direct indirect change in its many forms. How are the educators and learners support in terms of their mental health? I think that's very important because it's coming from my field. I mean, I will add the questions of Ivan, and do we as a lecturer or educator, especially teacher, for example, really aware of our students' mental health? I was wondering all the time. Who wants to start? Maybe Pamangara? Pamangara maybe can also answer questions from Ummi Salama, how to implement transformative education in classroom. Pamangara coming from mathematics field, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe you can add that two questions. Do we really aware of our students' mental health, and how to implement transformative learning in mathematics classroom?
Okay, thank you. First, about the mental health, I think transformative education doesn't enforce the transformation, but empower the person, the people, the individual to transform. So it's not something from the outside, but from the inside. So our task as teacher is not to transform others, but to empower them to transform themselves. That's my view. And that about the mathematics practice, there are some influences from critical theory in transformative education. And this critical theory has concern about empowering people into a critical one by being aware of oneself and one's surrounding, which is social or physical. So if we want to implement transformative learning in our classroom, we need to think of various ways that may emphasize this concern. How to help our students to be a critical one. How to help our students to be aware of themselves and their surrounding. In my study, if I may share, I found that there are two main gates to implement transformative learning in mathematics. Maybe we can also expand this view or this result to other disciplines as well. And these two gates are the pedagogy and the mathematics characteristics itself. First, I want to talk about the pedagogy. Through pedagogy, we can implement the transformative education by designing proper approach. Since we want to be critical of ourselves and our surrounding, then we may want to consider differences. Thus, we need to try to listen to others in order to understand of this difference. In other words, by engaging with others, we may understand ourselves. So, with our improvements of our understanding ourselves and others, we also may later help others to understand themselves and empower them to transform themselves. In practice, there are some approach that we use mathematics instruction. First is through the problem that we choose. In mathematics practice, there is a term open problem. I believe also in other discipline may use this open problem. By offering a open problem, we may help the students to experience these differences, because open problem provide an opportunity for students to find different solution from different views. By experiencing these different views, then we experience the differences itself. So it may help us realize that my own view is not the only one, that truth may be looked from different perspective. So this kind of approach may help to improve or to empower our students in this transformation process. And then the second is with interactivity. By bringing this interactivity in the classroom experience, we experience others. Then, I mean by experience others, we may hear others' voices, we may see others' views. Again, in this interactivity, we can understand others from others' view, and we may understand ourselves by comparing these different views. And then the third one, by using reflections in our teaching practice. Because by engaging in the reflection, we bring back our experiences, and it may help us to construct meaning through these experiences. So I think these are some practice that we can use in mathematics classroom, and also maybe can be modified properly to another disciplines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Mangara. And there's Ibu Neni from UNESA, a lecturer from UNESA. Maybe they can give from her experience how to integrate transformative education for math class, subjects. Please, Ibu Neni.
I think she is not in the room right now. Probably Baldi.
She is. She asked me to. She asked me. She asked me to.
Okay. Thank you, Bu
Sudah selesai ya?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's a nice question from Umi, talking about transformative teaching in mathematics. I'm going to talk about how to answer it in praxis. I talk in praxis, not in practice, because if we are doing and if we are thinking about the practice of teaching mathematics, then we will consider and we will be aware that there is something changing within ourselves as a teacher, and also there is a change in our students as well. So, and the teaching process will empower ourselves and others. So in my experience, while I'm teaching mathematics using this transformative approach, usually I start with questioning myself. And it's also in the paper that I wrote with Peters and the others in our book of transformative learning last year. So talking about the self, you will reflect to there will be yourself or the self in a general or in the macro perspective. So I start by asking myself, what will I teach? So is it only a subject or it's something else? And what dominates my thinking of teaching mathematics? Is it related or regarding with my culture, identities, or not? So by thinking about what hegemony that usually force my teaching practice, I start to fight the hegemony itself. So, for example, usually we teach mathematics only with abstract things, you know, like doing the formula, applying it to the problem solving, and so on and so forth. But by thinking differently in transformative way, I start to think what kind of problems that I pose to my students. Is that really the problem for them, or the problem itself it's related with their own cultures or not? Because I'm thinking also about relating the cultures into the context that we use in mathematical problems. That's the important things after we found the cultural self-knowing. So I implement the 5 ways of knowing that Peter's already mentioned in the beginning, at the beginning of the presentation. So, and afterward, I'm engaging them to think about their own cultures regarding the topic, the mathematical topics I will discuss in the classroom. And afterward, they see how the mathematics related with their own culture. So that really like a rich discussion in our classroom, because each students, they think about, oh, so this topic that I've learned so far doesn't relate it with my culture. It is in my culture. So that's the way they are changing, and the way I'm changing as well as a teacher, because I see the light in the classroom where we are found ourselves in doing mathematics. So I think that's the most powerful thing that I found while I'm applying this transformative approach to mathematics teaching. Thank you, Bu Sisi, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And there's one question from Ibu Ani Yusanti. Maybe I will answer this. This is interesting. She's from English Foreign Language Classroom for junior high school students. I was teacher for 5 years in junior high school before become a lecturer, and I teach English. I teach English, and if I reflect on my experience in English class after this transformative learning, I become realize that the wrong thing that I've done or not doing when I was teacher. And I think if we teach English as foreign language, there are a lot of opportunity to apply transformative learning. For example, there's in English classroom we have reading assignment. For example, we can choose what kind of reading that we need to ask for our student to read. The kind of the reading that we give them is something that relate to their identity. Is that something away from their identity, away from their experience, for example? And since English is a foreign language, we also can develop questions about how we deal with foreign. For example, in Indonesia, this is very interesting because in Indonesia there is some kind of, we really want to be in the global area. For example, we want to be like them. We want to be with them, but at the same time we need to, there is some political force that we need to preserve our identity as Indonesia. And I think by learning English in foreign language, we can deal with this. And there's also some critiques from the old generation, for example, that our students more and more like Westerners, and they learn English, for example, and they are afraid they become Westerner, for example. And I think we also can talk about this too. And also in speaking, for example, in some teacher maybe want to have standardized English speaking pronunciation, but we know that Indonesia is very, very various in ethnic, and some different ethnic having some different kind of using English in speaking. From here, for example, we can see how I speak English will be different from Ibu Yuli's English, from Mangara's English, from Ibu Neni's English. I think we also in English teaching, we also can learn about this, how we accept or not accept the standardized English speaking. And I think about the writing too. There is one, I have conversation with English classroom teacher in junior high. She's talk about the English in integrating with mental health. And she's really astonished that when she introduced the issues of mental health in her students, she find out that suicidal thoughts is very common in adolescents. And I think that is also a very interesting thing that we can apply in English classroom, dealing what Peter said about our social problem. There is some data, big data, that our adolescents dealing with depression and anxiety, and I think this English classroom we can talk about that. I think that is maybe we can do in our English classroom for Ibu Ani Yusanti, or maybe other.
Hi, Peter. It is I. Anik Yusanti is I from Kalimantan, Jakarta.
Yeah. Hi, hello, I. I just noticed that Johannes said hello. He was a master student at SMEC 20 years ago.
Oh.
Okay.
Maybe I could say something as we're getting close to the end here.
Yes.
There's the impact of the pandemic on the Australian higher education system is profound. It may not be you may not be aware of it, but Australian universities are very, very reliant financially on international students, fee-paying students. It's something like 40% of the Australian universities' income comes from international students. And now there's this big, big concern, when will they return? If they will return. And so there's this crisis, in a sense, going on at the moment in the leadership of Australian universities. Where are we going to get our money from? How are we going to be financially sustainable? The federal government is saying, don't look at us. You know, we've been cutting and cutting and cutting for the last 30 years, and we're not going to change direction. So this offers a really interesting opportunity for a paradigm shift in higher education in Australia, and probably also in the UK and the USA. We cannot continue with business as usual in higher education. So there's all sorts of possible consequences from universities closing, universities merging, universities trying not to duplicate each other and being more niche marketing, if you like. So I'll put that aside and then go back to what's going on with you guys. Now, Bal at Kathmandu University is a really good example of something that everybody can do. Not necessarily any longer are you looking overseas for your master's and doctoral courses. You guys have got a really high level of ability and competence and skill and track records to run your own postgraduate programs at the master's and doctoral levels. The sort of intellectual scholarship that's been on display this morning is profound. I've been to many, many conferences over the last 30 years, and I haven't come across such a rich collection of intellectual scholarship, particularly in a cross-disciplinary way. So you need more confidence about your ability to develop your own doctoral programs in-house within your own countries, and maybe, you know, this technology that we've now developed is going to provide more opportunity for international courses as well. You know, Durban University and Kathmandu University and the 5 universities in Indonesia having some form of postgraduate coursework collaboration and maybe even co-supervision. What I'm trying to say here is you don't necessarily need to see the future as sending all your postgraduate students overseas. And this is one way the transformative learning in terms of research and postgraduate studies can really start to take off. End of lecture.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Maybe Yuli, do you have last comment before I close?
Can I
Okay,
add, now that I'm
okay,
wearing
please,
the
Rekha.
international hat in my university, I may have a bit to add. Yes, we did really, Australia relies highly on international students, but when I look at the global international students in Western world, Australia is a very small fish, with USA leading, UK followed by Canada, and then Australia and New Zealand well below it. But keeping in view how we have fared with COVID-19, I think still for international students, Australia or New Zealand would be a safer space to go to if required. But I think you come in, like people moving, it shouldn't be one-way traffic. It should be a two-way traffic. Even Australian students or Western students choosing to go into Asia and learning from there. And that is where transformation is going to happen. And that is a new paradigm which has emerged not post-COVID-19. It has been there for a while, where we have articulated degrees, dual degrees. Students spend some time in a host institution and then go and spend a significant amount of time, maybe if it's a 3-year degree, maybe 2+1. And from Curtin, we have evidence that we are even sending our students to Asian countries in an articulated course. So Peter, what you are suggesting, that's also happening. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So I think we already answer all questions. Ifang already answered by the Bal, and then I think it's already reached the time, Bu Susi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I say something? One or two sentences to what Peter has just said.
Okay.
I think what we need to do, thank you, Peter, and other colleagues. One of the, I think, regarding the status of higher education, and I would say not just higher education, but also knowledge productions. If we export our students, to the so-called Western universities, then we also give our knowledge into them. It's a long term. It has a long-term repercussions actually. What Rekha has just said, that might be one model. It's not just going us to the so-called Western developed world and giving our knowledge in there. But what is important is to contribute ourselves in knowledge productions that we can actually decolonize academia. So I think this is very, very important. So we need to develop our postgraduate programs. We can collaborate with universities around the world, no problem. We can do South-South collaboration. We can do South-North collaboration. We can do East and West collaboration. But the model, the business model of higher education is so appealing. It's not just higher education, but also knowledge production. You see, we publish the paper, let's say Taylor and Francis, and then Springer, and they charge huge, hefty amount of money, and we cannot download our own papers. So I think we need to stop this, and we need to start doing our own rigorous production, knowledge production. This is also one kind of transformative education. So what I mean to say that, of course, there are movements towards open knowledge and the focus on decolonizing knowledge production in itself. It's not just it doesn't mean that we should actually slash the standard. We can maintain the standard even in our countries. So we need to start publishing papers. We need to start, contextualizing our problems rather than using, the framework, which may not be very, very helpful, very useful. for us. So we need to actually exercise transformation at all levels of our educational processes, in designing the problem, in conceptualizing higher education in our own country, conceptualizing education system, conceptualizing our courses, our content, selecting the content, and also prioritizing the reading materials, even prioritizing the reading materials as well. So I think these are very, very important steps that we need to take. I think Africa is also experiencing this. I mean, when I was in Durban in 2017, there was a, I could see the moment was going on. I don't know what is happening now, but this is there has been some great steps taken to decolonize the higher education. I think this is very, very important. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ba. And I think we have the end of our seminar. And thank you for all thank you, Peter, and all the panel that shared the experience, and also friends from Kathmandu, from Australia, from India, Africa, and also share the experience, and adding the seminar became very enriched. And thank you for the audience who are also has already engaged with the questions and inspiring insight from chat. I cannot read them all, but it's very interesting. And thank you for all that. Maybe we TERG in Indonesia will come with another issue, another theme in seminars. We will let you know about this, and we hope we can join again in this very inspiring conversation. I think this is very interesting. I mean, we can share, not only focus on one of the speaker, but we all can share, and it feels like a colleague meeting, not like the traditional seminar. It seems like we apply what we learn about transformative education. And for audience and also friends from all over the world, wait for our another seminar series. And thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. And see you in another seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.